All right, guys, here's our quick Han Dynasty review. Han Dynasty China is growing at the exact same time that Rome is entering its empire stage and Pax Romana. So here we've got the Han Dynasty Empire in China. Come on, little. And over here we have the great Roman Empire spanning 3 continents. So we have Rome in the west and the Han Dynasty in the east. And the Han Dynasty is going to start when all the oppression and the nastiness of Shi Huangdi and the Qin Dynasty, after their harsh, legalistic, heavy punishment system, is going to collapse. The people of China are going to rebel, and civil war follows until about 202 BC, right about the time that Rome has defeated ancient Carthage. Liu Bang is going to defeat the rival dynasties in China in this era of conflict and start the new and the great Han Dynasty. And Liu Bang is going to go on like a 3-step plan to revive his empire. Number 1, he wants a strong, centralized government, very similar to the Han Dynasty, or to the Qin Dynasty. The problem is he's going to rename it and make it look a little different. He is going to lower taxes and soften the harsher punishments. And he is going to decide to rule through Confucianism instead of the heavy-handed legalistic taxes. And one of the things that the Han Dynasty is known for, one of the hallmarks, is that they try to recopy and rewrite all the books that Shi Huangdi burnt. And there is a lot of criticism, while they're not original and they may not be accurate. Doesn't matter. They recovered volumes and volumes of lost texts and Chinese history. And Liu Bang and his immediate successors are extremely careful in how they consolidated their power. They did everything very slowly but steadily, very incrementally. And they tried to avoid anything that would resemble the Qin Dynasty's speed of rapid overnight change. And the other thing that they do very well is not only do they scale back punishments for crimes, but they put resources into the economy. They are very smart. They save up and they collect large reserves of cash. Crap, is that today?
Yeah.
I don't have it. So I'll get it to you tomorrow. If you can't buy it, I got you. All right. Hang on a sec. The Han Dynasty, sorry about that, put a lot of resources into the economy where they saved up their cash. That's what I was saying. And they didn't make an improvement or a public works project until they had the money to pay for it up front. And so while the Qin Dynasty was successful at building roads and building the Great Wall, they heavily taxed the people. So the Qin Dynasty, where they heavily taxed the people, the Han Dynasty didn't do that at all. And as a result, since they built up this large reserve of cash money, they were seen as model sage emperors. And this brings us to the reign of Han Wuti. Han Wuti is the emperor that the dynasty is named after. At the age of 16, he becomes a war hero. And he comes to power in 141 BC, and he's going to reign for an incredibly long 54 years. And he is going to bring stability to China, one emperor for 5 decades. And he builds on the prosperity of his predecessors. Not only does he build those large cash reserves, but he builds that canal linking the Yellow River with the capital in Jian, an economic highway that linked the northern and southern parts of China. And he began a policy known as the ever-level granaries. Whatever area had a bumper crop of food, their food was distributed and put in silos throughout the country. So if someone experienced a flood or a famine, they would not have to suffer. They would have food to eat during this time. Now all this has to be paid for, so Han Wu-Ti didn't tax his people, but he taxed his merchants. Remember, merchants are seen as rich because they make money off of other people's labor. So they bore the brunt of the taxes. Another way that Han Wu-Ti gained money was by having monopolies on important items like copper and salt, iron and liquor. Things that everybody needed and liquor they wanted. So they had to go through Han Wu-Ti to get them. So this will lead to a thing known as the salt and the iron debates between the Confucian scholars and the legalistic ministers of China. The legalistic ministers said it's okay for the emperor to have monopolies. The Confucians said no, they should be left in private hands, because if the emperor acts as this monopolistic business owner, he is nothing more than a merchant. The Confucian scholars claim victory, but to this day the Chinese government maintains some monopolies. While the salt and iron debates were ongoing, this was the time of Pax Romana in ancient Rome. And so Han Wu-Ti also aggressively expands China's borders. He expands downward into Vietnam and over into Korea, and he's the one who first starts going after the Mongols up here in the Gobi Desert. And he sets the hallmark of you're not a strong dynasty unless you expand China's borders. And he will relocate 100,000 soldiers and 700,000 citizens and build a new city in the Gobi Desert, kind of like Augustus Caesar's make the world Rome policy to get rid of the Mongols. Now, social structure is the same as it always is. All right, the emperor is on top. His local, miniature kings and governors are underneath him. Then it's the Confucian scholars. Then peasants. All right, peasants are elevated over artisans and merchants because, well, they make money off of other people's labor. Underneath that was soldiers and slaves. By the time Han Wu-Ti is done, the size of China is about the size of the modern-day United States. It was really big. And what helps the Han government throughout their long history is their brilliance in keeping the Han central bureaucracy. They just made it look different. And one of the things that they did was when they collected taxes, a lot of this stuff is going to be expensive. But when Han Wu-Ti was reigning, he tried to transfer that burden from the peasants. Unfortunately, after his reign, we're going to get to the bottom end of that cycle, and we're going to get people who once again increasingly taxed the peasants. But what helped out was the Confucian scholar civil service exam. You had to take a civil service test if you wanted to work for the government. And it was your grade on this test that determined where you worked. A C, you got to govern a small village. A B, a mid-sized town. An A, a large-sized city, or even advising the emperor. But not only did you need a good test score, you also had to have a good recommendation from somebody who was already a scholar. The idea behind this is you don't want to give somebody who's not good enough a job, who's not worthy. So if I give one of you a job and you screw up, not only do you get fired, but I do as well. So 120,000 scholars are going to run a country of 60 million people. This works so well, the Chinese will use it up into 1912. Anybody was available to do it, but because wealthy aristocratic sons had time to study, they did better than most of the time. Some of the technological advances that were made during this time, during this golden age, is the Han Dynasty developed a type of paper from wood pulp, instead of writing on bamboo, a durable paper that can aid in writing and transmitting of information, especially with all the records that needed to be taken and kept. To transport goods, they built the stern post rudder coming off the bottom of a ship and added a compass to it, allowing them to steer the ship better and travel farther distances. Unfortunately, very similar to Rome, after Han Wu Ti, military expenses outgrew the amount of tax money that they were bringing in. And so the military was scaled back. And with this, economic monopolies were loosened. There was a more laissez-faire, kind of every man for himself economy that happened in China. With the loss in governmental revenue, the burden began to fall on the peasants, until trade is going to open up along the Silk Road. It will start in China and go through the regional empire, the mighty Gupta Empire in India, the Sassanid Persian Empire, all the way over to ancient Rome. And farming was seen as the most honored job. But bad things began to happen. And all of a sudden, peasants have to share a greater shoulder of the burden. They begin to revolt. And all this happens under an emperor named Wang Mang around 8 BC. And not only did Wang Mang try to fix these problems, everything he tried actually made them worse. And there was a small, tiny blip of resurgence of the Mongols. Not a big one, but enough to scare people. So Wang Mang was executed and eaten. All of this is going on while Rome is experiencing the beginnings of Pax Romana. But in 8 BC, some distant cousins of Han Wu Ti come in and they resuscitate the empire, and they will last till about 220 AD, right about the end of Pax Romana. And they organized a strong central government with a fair economy and softer laws. And they turn things over to the people to farm, and they really begin to focus on trade. While we don't like merchants, we like this effect of bringing in money and ideas and cultural diffusion. The later Han Dynasty also aggressively goes after the Mongols, pushing them westward, causing that domino effect of barbarians that would eventually get to Rome. The Mongols never got to Rome. So anyway, this is the snowplow. The expansion of the Silk Road will raise the status of merchants, as trading along the Silk Road would travel over 4,000 miles from the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia to the Persian Empire of Iran. And ideas from like Buddhism from India made it. Products like glass and iron from Rome were exchanged for silk. Spices from India, you name it. However, near the end, a plague does make it across the Silk Road and will affect China by killing millions. So the end of the Han Dynasty comes in 220 because of internal weaknesses the Han Dynasty will collapse for the second and final time in 220. It was a combination of large landowners who were long distances away from the empire, were out of touch. The emperor couldn't police them. Proximity to authority. Wealthy Chinese nobles built their own private armies to keep themselves safe and force smaller farmers to sell their land and become kind of slaves to the larger landowner. The Chinese used their power to avoid paying taxes and their distance from the emperor, so the burden falls again on the people. And so by 180, rebellions begin to break out. Han Dynasty generals pounded them hard like the Roman generals did, and a lot of this heavy taxation caused a lot of people to flee southward to avoid paying taxes. So after 400 years of great unity, one of the golden ages of China is going to come to an end. So in 220, the Han Dynasty replaces rival kingdoms. They have a centralized government, and they build a lot of roads and bridges and defensive walls. Rome will become a republic, a thing of the people. They will eventually have a centralized government with Julius Caesar, and they will also spend a lot of money building roads and cities and bridges and towns. But all of those things will cost a lot of money. The Han Dynasty will conquer many diverse people bordering the lands of China, governing 60 million people in 1.5 million square miles, and they are unified by a written language. Over in Rome, Rome also conquers diverse people on 3 different continents: Africa, Asia, and Europe. They had a population of 55 million people and 3.4 million square miles. And while Latin was the language of the government, it did not replace indigenous religions in the empire. The Han Dynasty will have ongoing conflicts, aggressive conflicts, trying to exterminate the nomads, shoving them out, and they will fall apart in 220, and it will take several hundred years for the Tang, Sui, Tang, and Song dynasties to return. Well, the Romans will have an ongoing conflict with barbarians, not only expanding their territory, but barbarians shoved out by the Han over several hundred years will migrate westward and cause the collapse of the Roman Empire, never to be restored. All right, guys, that's as fast as I can do it. If you have any questions, please let me know.